And how do we protect our executives that can really materially hurt our companies if they are compromised? And so, led you to this? What led you to the point
Yeah.
where you're like, hey, there's got to be a company that does this for executives and handles cyber health there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks. Thanks for having me on, first of all. Um, my origin story is a sad story, unfortunately. But hopefully it's going to have a happy ending.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Briefcase. I am your host, Rocky Giglio, and on with me today, with all the things happening in AI and cyber, is a special guest, Jeremy Banon. Jeremy is the CEO of CyberHealth. And Jeremy, thrilled to have you on today and dive into some of what you've been looking at and what you guys are attacking. We're really going to look at three different areas of cyber risk today. And as you know, and as our audience knows, there's a ton going on here, and compromise is only getting worse. And you've got like a very niche focus, which I love, in how do we protect our executives that can really materially hurt our companies if they are compromised. And so, can't wait for the audience to hear what you've been up to, your experience, kind of what led you to this. And so maybe that's where we'll start. But if you stay tuned as we get into the episode, Jeremy's also got some cool free offers for those of you that are listening in. So there you go, Jeremy, with the stage set. Tell me a little bit about what led you to this? What led you to the point
Yeah.
where you're like, hey, there's got to be a company that does this for executives and handles cyber health there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks. Thanks for having me on, first of all. Um, my origin story is a sad story, unfortunately. But hopefully it's going to have a happy ending. So as a part of my first job, I was a venture capitalist. We invested in one of the very early rounds into Coinbase.
Mm,
And as a part of that like diligence process, like I bought like Bitcoin personally a very long time ago. Um, Several years later, when sort of it became very clear it wasn't going anywhere and the price reflected that reality, I was surgically targeted by an attacker. And I was
mm.
actually one of the very early victims of SIM swapping, where someone had ported my cell phone number to a device they controlled, and sort of
Wow.
all the different like cascading, um, sort of implications of that. Yeah. Um, I would say in the wake of that attack, I realized three things. Number one, companies like Verizon, Apple, Google were my primary like security personally. Number two, their default settings were not geared towards
Mm,
privacy and security at all, but were much more in their favor, like really sort of like set by the product managers, as we say, the
sure.
devil's in the
Yeah.
defaults. And their business goals were clearly furthered, and my privacy and security was not.
Yeah.
Um, the last thing is when I really needed support, like I was in a moment of deep need, you would think that the defenders are the ones you can go to, but I actually realized that they are ill-equipped to help you. In some cases, they don't even have human support, and in other cases, they're unwilling, especially as the attack moved product to product. That once I told sort of Google or Apple or Coinbase that, oh, it was my app, they immediately threw their hands up and said, well, that's where our support stops. And so I went on this personal mission to understand what had happened, how to prevent it from happening again. And I would say the research into my own attack very much became the basis for the company. And sort of the undeniable conclusion is that my job, my role was like a critical reason I was targeted. But that was like clearly a gap in security, where like it was actually not even on the radar of
Yeah.
the company. It was something they should be thinking about, was how to, the personal security of employees as being almost like a occupational hazard that has to be accounted for.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I mean, just thinking about little issues I've had with tech products, right? Hey, my identity isn't working quite right, and you go to call them or try to get support, and like there's no phone number, there's nobody you can get a
Yeah.
hold of, and you're just like at the mercy of this company to try to figure this out. Then make that worse, where there's someone stealing your identity, and yeah, man, you got a nightmare on your hands. So
Yeah,
that's
it's like
that's fascinating.
product
Yeah,
security is no substitute for Rocky security, right?
yeah,
Like I think that they, again, amazing people work in security at all of these companies. So I'm not here
yeah,
saying they're not doing their job. It's just
yeah,
like the incentive is different. They want to protect their product, not like the entirety of the user. Like, and so like I think that almost equilibrium today, where again, especially in the executive class where we focus, you have this invisible coordination of product security as your primary defense. Like I think that
yeah.
equilibrium is like very unstable.
Yeah, that is fascinating because it isn't. We're also in a time where most of these breaches that are happening through the identity of people who have some sort of access, right? Or at least the ability to jump from that person after you've compromised them to other systems and all that kind of stuff. I mean, just read the news, right? Most of these breaches, that's what's happening, right? They're getting in first, then taking advantage of vulnerabilities that exist. And so this is like vulnerability number one is how do we protect Jeremy and Rocky from being breached and having their accounts stolen and that kind of stuff. So,
I
yeah,
think
very
that's right.
interesting. So, I mean, most cybersecurity products do that. I mean, you just mentioned it, right? They focus on their product, not really on the users that are coming in. In fact, I was working with a company that had an issue where the accounts that their customers were using were just like their personal Gmail accounts and stuff like that, right? And they were getting compromised, and so then their accounts were getting into the system, and then they could get access to data sets and stuff they shouldn't have. And so it's very interesting to hear you say, that's kind of the experience you had, right? Is like, hey, my identity is being attacked. It's not the product, right? Who can help me with this? And to your point, it's not like the cyber guys are sitting there going, nah, we don't care. Tough luck. It's just they're not set up for that. So a
Yeah,
little
like
bit
their
of
their walls
vulnerability.
are neatly defined, and attackers are like, do not underestimate how
Yeah,
enterprising and creative they are to like exploit chain, right? Like find
yeah,
sort of connecting moves, as we call it, between products. And again, it's just like the defenders are set up to protect like their sort of four walls and their
yeah,
users. But again, because these things are tethered at the identity layer, like it's very easy to move like from uh,
yeah.
from service to service. And again, like the sort of current defensive like infrastructure just breaks down for most people once that happens, as it did for me.
Yes. So tell me a little about that journey. Like, as you discovered this and started getting in, what are some key things that you realized right away?
Number one is like I was doing a ton of things that were obviously not right. I did not come. I mean, this was, 2016, 2017. Like
Sure.
I had no experience whatsoever with password management or multi-factor, or I didn't even know what SIM swapping was. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of people knew what it was
Yeah.
back then. But again, there were like so many obvious things that I did wrong that if any one or two of those had been different, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Hmm.
But again, I take full responsibility, to be clear, but I think the silly thing is to not take responsibility going forward and identify that these service providers are not
Yeah.
sufficient, right? Perhaps necessary, but definitely not sufficient. Um, and so I think, again, like as a part of this very long journey to protect myself going forward, I greatly tried to reduce reliance on companies that I didn't think were up for the job. Um, and again, I think that involves a lot of like hard work, and it's not easy. It's one of the reasons we exist is because I don't think it's really approachable for a lot of people to make these risk adjusted decisions. And so we, in a lot of ways, think of ourselves as a partner for that.
Yeah. And probably not even just the risk side of it as much as like the tech side, right? I mean, think about all the
Correct.
things you probably had to do. And that actually, I'd love to hear about that. But I'm thinking executives that I've worked with over the years, right? Uh, Early in my career, CEO wants to do this broadcast to the whole company, using like a webcasting program, right? He has no idea what it's doing. He just knows there's this way to do this and to talk to everybody in this virtual town hall. And so he's like, hey, make it happen, right? And I'm like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? And it became very clear that like this guy's very successful. He's running a company, he's making big decisions, he's got plenty on his plate, but I needed him to do some technical things, and he had no idea what I was talking about, right? And so I learned really early in my career that just because these are tech companies, a lot of them that I was working with, doesn't mean the executives are technical people. And again, to your point on like the cyber side, it's not like they don't know what they're doing and they don't care. They don't have time, right? They don't have time for that. And so that's definitely another element that I can see right away. As you're telling this story, I'm thinking, oh man, all the stuff you probably found as a technical user, uh, most executives are not going to do that, right? They're not going to take that time or even understand it, right?
Yeah, I think like humans famously struggle, right, to
Yeah,
invest time and dollars today for some future payback, right?
yeah,
And I would say that like if there is sort of like a happy ending here, it's that I was sufficiently motivated in the wake of what had happened
yeah,
to go through a ton of pain and experimentation, and I busted a couple computers, right? Like I downloaded some things I probably shouldn't have downloaded that were like way over my head. And I would say like I was sufficiently motivated to make those mistakes, right? Like so other people could walk like through like a nicely paved pathway where a lot of that research, again, like hopefully will make things easier for other people in the future. Um, I think your assessment is correct that time is probably the biggest like constraint on people getting excellent security and privacy. And it's one of the reasons, again, that we exist is to make almost like what we call CyberHealth butter, which is like, how do you make the experience? Look, what is security? It's intentional friction. You're adding friction to people's lives. How do you make that as, painless as possible to get to the other side?
Yeah.
While still sort of like instilling those excellent principles, they're going to keep people safe on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. I can think of a few folks I need to get you introduced to because they're going through some pain now. And so that's definitely one of those like, how do we fix this? Right? How do we fix this in a way that you need the security? We can't just ignore it, right? I mean, that's the other side now, especially is you can't ignore it. But there's a lot of friction.
Historically in the security community, I would say like personal security is considered like Mickey Mouse stuff, right? It's not serious to a lot of practitioners.
Yeah.
Part of it because maybe they think it's easy or there's not much to do or it's the consequences are lower or what have you. And I would say as such, there's been very limited talent that is like, again, applied themselves to this problem. And I don't think that there exists like excellent frameworks and, systematizing of risk reduction that can help people get an approachable way, even if they want to. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the pain that I experienced in the wake of my attack is I was looking for a good partner who was reputable, who was experienced in taking someone from, I'm not sure where I start today, right? I don't know what my starting spot is, but like take me to relative exceptional. And like, I don't think anyone had figured that like pipeline out in like an organized way where I could say, sign me up, give me sort of risk reduction. And in a lot of ways, again, like that's what inspired the companies, regardless of your technical sophistication or current posture today. I want to be able to take any individual, any executive, any high risk person, and say, if you commit, we will turn you into relative exceptional.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Why do you think people don't see this need enough? Right? I mean, I think we all know identity is a real threat, but or the identities of our executives, those kinds of things, right? But it does seem like this is a gap, right? Why do you think that?
There's two things. I think there's what I mentioned before, which is like if you haven't experienced something, then I think it's very hard to quantify like the value of, say, a vitamin, which is like, what am I willing to sacrifice today to not experience some potential future cost tomorrow? And you can think about healthcare as being a very similar analogy. Like we use a lot of healthcare analogies, like Rocky, like, do you get up and go on the treadmill like, 3 times a week? And maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think a lot of people struggle with that. It's like, well, I don't get anything immediately. I know it's good for me, but like, I'd rather just sleep in. So again, like that, like deferred, payback is I think what the second thing is actually much more, I think, a human nature element, which is that I actually think cybercrime is like incredibly underreported. If you look at the FBI IC3 statistics, the 2025 numbers came out a few weeks ago. The reported numbers are just over 1 million victims of Americans sort of filed reports with the FBI to say I was compromised, and reported losses were 20 billion. I think even the FBI acknowledges that the numbers are like 3 to 5x underreported. And there's really two reasons why people don't report it. I think on the low end, like there's a lot of times it's like not worth it to go file a police report if you didn't lose any money, or if you lost a little bit of money, it's like, all right, I learned my lesson. I'm not calling the FBI or filing some report. They're not going to get me the money. Okay.
Yeah, they're not even going to look into it. What's the point? Yeah.
At the high end of the barbell, which are the biggest attacks, there's real incentive to not report to law enforcement. You don't want people poking around. Maybe you have done some things that are questionable that you just don't want to assume any risk. Maybe you're handling it privately. Maybe you don't want to like make a claim to insurance or something like that.
Sure.
And so we see sort of like at both ends of the extreme, at the very low and at the high end, like these numbers don't get reported. As such, we think, and again, I think the FBI concurs, that there is like underreporting on both the case count and the amount lost per year. Very, very similar is I think like in terms of the underreporting, there is often a shame factor. people are scared to admit that this happened to them. They think it looks poorly upon themselves or their business. They are embarrassed by a very, very, very sort of uh, regrettable situation to say that it happened to me. And I think we hope in the future to be a big part of this destigmatizing that it's a huge, huge thing. I mean, we're talking about like single digit percentage points of Americans are like, we think are experiencing this every year. Like, imagine if there was some disease that impacted 1 to 2% of Americans, like Major League Baseball would have a monthly campaign about it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, we don't think it's anything to be embarrassed about. And again, I think those two factors, right?
And the brevity, or not the brevity, the expansiveness of this, right, is like, it's going to impact so many things that we don't realize, so yeah, I think that's definitely true. It's like, if we did have that level of disease or health risk, right, we'd be talking about it. It'd be on the news every night, et cetera, right? But then you said something that's interesting, and I do think it's true, is there is an element of embarrassment, right? I like to watch these scam baiters on YouTube, right? And people don't report that stuff because, they feel bad. Like, oh man, I totally fell for that trap. I
I've
clicked the
personally
link,
had
whatever.
friends, very successful people, call me and say, "How did I fall for this? Like,
Yeah.
how did this happen? Like, I knew it. I knew the whole time something was off, and I just kept going." And
Yeah.
uh, I think some respect to the craftsmanship of attackers is overdue. These are professionals. They are very, very good at their job. And
Yeah.
you are not a professional defender. They are conducting these social engineering
That's
attacks
right.
hundreds of times per week. And, I
Yeah.
think it's almost arrogance to think that I don't have to do anything. I'm good. They'll
Yeah.
never.
It's a multi-billion-dollar business, right? When you look at how much money is stolen every year through these scams, that kind of stuff, right?
We think it's 100. We think it's 100 billion. Like, that's our
Yeah.
internal number. We think it's $100 billion a year.
Yeah. And I believe that, right? I mean, just the sheer number of attacks that are happening, definitely makes it seem like there's a gap here, right? So,
That's right.
and I know when you and I talked before, it's like, there's also this reality that, like, you feel like, well, this is my problem, not the company's or whatever, right? So there's this idea that, like, well, I need to do better at that. It's not really my company's problem to fix, right? It's my fault. And so there's an element of this too, where the companies need to realize, cyber leaders, CISOs, right? They need to realize that, no, there's actually, like, there's a reason to do this, right? Because this is an area where you could really protect your organization, right? Get some awareness too. Jeremy, you said something, I think, when we were talking in the pre-show, about, it sounds selfish to be like, hey, we need to do this, so that the executives uh, will see the risk, the cyber risk, right? But think about it as a CISO, right? There's all these risks that you're trying to get attention on. Now in today's world, right? AI everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's some light being shined, but it's hard to get investment, et cetera. And so this is a way to help the C-suite see, at the personal level, there's a tie to cybersecurity and to what you're doing at the personal level, and then at the organizational level. And so it really does help, I think, bridge that gap too, of like, how this actually happens, and why it's important to invest in these types of things, right? And in cybersecurity, to keep an organization secure, right? Obviously, there's always that balance of budgeting and whatever else, but just making that tie. So, like, hey, this is your risk, and this is what could happen if you're compromised. This is why cybersecurity budget matters. So if you're a CISO listening, like, that's something to think about too. Is like, this is an element of making your cybersecurity strategy personal to these executives, right? Is tying those two things together.
Yeah, I mean, I think like state of affairs is this: defense in companies is keeping up by and large and doing like an amazing job. Like, I have a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of respect for CISOs, their entire team. They have a really hard job. Their budgets are under pressure. I don't think they're
Yeah.
properly appreciated. They fight tooth and nail every day to keep the company safe. No one appreciates them when they're doing their job day in and day out. And then when incidents happen, like, they look to them and be like, "Why'd you guys mess up?"
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, the executives, the senior leaders, the people who are have privileged access, who are often first to get exceptions from IT, who have material non-public information about the company, have by and large stayed the same. we have a bunch of data on this, but like I can promise you, like I don't think like password manager adoption or multi-factor adoption or patching cadence have improved at all in the last like say like 5 years. And I would say the state of like threat actors is that they have gotten much better, largely due to open source AI models, and also just increased practitioner, right? Like time, like they are more practiced and better. And so almost by like just by the fact like attacks have gotten better and your executives have stayed the same, like your executives have actually gotten worse.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? I mean,
if you were like this before, now it's like this, right?
yeah. And so what does that mean? It means that attackers are not stupid, right? Like, again, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them, that they will go after like the easiest pathway to get what they want. And that's often after senior leaders. Now, okay, so then play it out. What happens? They're going after senior leaders. I have a million stories, and they end up going to the CISO and they say, hey, my personal email got hacked or my cell phone. And the CISO's like, why didn't you come to me 10 weeks ago? Like, why'd you wait till now to notice the problem? And then the CISOs are like, all right, well, let me go send someone on my team to go take a look at it. And there's a number of problems with that. And so like our view is like, hey, why don't you make the investment proactively? Work with us, have our executives work with us and say, let's measure them, let's improve them, and let's minimize the likelihood that problem comes on your desk in the first place. Back to what you were saying before on making security selfish, we think there's almost this payback for the CISOs as well, where they're allocating some super small percentage of their budget to the sort of personal lives of their executive team, which oftentimes are the people that approve their budgets, people they report into. And I think in return, what they get is a much more like resilient organization, but also one that understands basic security concepts. They now, like, you'd be shocked at how many like C-suite executives do not know, like if you really ask them like what multi-factor authentication is. When they work with us, 100% of them know exactly what it is. And now they understand why security is pushing it out through the organization. Now they understand why they have to, sort of go to their email for the code, right? Like we increase the fluency of the leadership team, and that in turn makes the CISO's job easier. So we think there's like this almost flywheel effect of where you're building security culture by actually putting your money where your mouth is as a CISO, and again, protecting the people that are like most critical to running the company.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I saw an article last week, I think it was, on how we always tell cyber and tech that like you got to talk to the business in the business language, or right, you got to speak their language, or they're not going to give you the investments, et cetera, et cetera. And like that's fair, right? I mean, it's important to understand what your company is trying to do and understand the business model, all that kind of stuff. But it never goes the other way, right? And that time has passed, because we now live in a time where technical things are how we all operate. That's how our companies run. It's how we make our money. And so you can't just pretend that at the executive level, they don't need to understand or know any of this stuff, right? Like there does need to be that connection. And so this is a great way to make that not only personal for them, but then to bridge that gap in a way that's meaningful. And it's not just like, hey, learn my language so that I can talk better to you, but actually connects those dots between things like, why are we talking about passwordless? Why are we talking about, encryption keys and post quantum and all the things that are coming, right? Help them to see like why that happened. So what's this look like, Jeremy? If somebody's saying, hey, okay, I'm interested, what do we do here? How does the process work with you guys if they're thinking about bringing this to their executive team to help make those connections and start adding that extra layer of protection?
Yeah, so similar, you will hear plenty of synonyms to healthcare with us. So similar to like a new primary care physician, each executive will answer a questionnaire which helps us understand their security and privacy posture today. We will ask them questions that are like actually correlated with risk. How do you come up with a new password? Do you still have the default equipment that was given to you by your ISP and your home router? Have you frozen your credit? What are your attitudes towards social media, right? Things that, from a privacy perspective might get you targeted by an attacker. That is very similar, obviously, to what you'd answer in a questionnaire of like in a doctor's office, like, instead of asking, do you drink? And okay.
I mean, you already made me nervous. You're like, hey, do you walk on the treadmill? And I'm like, no, wait, don't ask me that live on air.
Exactly. In parallel, we will conduct a personal open source intelligence or OSINT report on each executive and other, sort of disciplines that might be called counter intel or oppo research. But
Yeah.
like that is our diagnostic. So instead of taking your blood pressure, height, weight, like your measurements, like we measure you in this way, where we simulate what an attacker will see outside looking in. We have very, very structured things that our OSINT is hunting for that are useful to an attacker. But we sort of have this voluntary response, which is inside looking out, and OSINT, which is outside looking in. Those two things will actually feed our data model, something that we call a CyberHealth score, which is our proprietary measure of personal cyber risk. And so like we will believe that improvement is predicated upon measurement, and we measure everybody to start. We do not give wholesale recommendations. Yes, there are things that are common person to person. For example, a doctor will say, don't smoke or work out or eat healthy. Like we, of course, have those recommendations that apply like fairly universally. But again, like prioritization of those things is not the same for everybody. And we do want to understand each person before we just start like firing a checklist off.
Yeah. Super
We
important.
will then build a personalized program for each of those executives that we call a care plan. Again, to continue the healthcare analogy, these are like the elements, the modules, software, service appointments, monitoring that we want to set up on your behalf to minimize the risks that we identified in our CyberHealth score that came from either your questionnaire or your open source intelligence research report. And again, we like to think of ourselves like One Medical or like one of these healthcare companies where we are measuring you, we are finding the things that are most applicable to you, and then resourcing against that. So to make sure that you get the best return on your time as defined by how much risk you're taking off the table. We can certainly go to the extreme with people and like really rev the security engine. And like, again, we love those types of executives who are like, I want to max this out. Like, how do you guys, and those are the easiest people to work with because they were preaching to the already converted. But of course, we want to be respectful of social goals, professional goals, right? Like I'm not going to take down a LinkedIn of somebody whose job it is to post on LinkedIn 3 times a week for their
Right.
job
Yeah.
because they have a recruitment goal or a marketing goal or something like that. So even that's part of our like onboarding is to understand like what their constraints are and make sure they're making great privacy and security adjusted decisions for them. And again, it doesn't just end at like the care plan, like we actually execute with them. So it's a long-term relationship. We do not think security and privacy are ever over. Just like, your doctor, you don't get a physical and you're like, I'm good, I'll call you if something's wrong. Like you have to sort of stay engaged proactively to stay ahead of threats and make sure that, you are maintaining your cyber health.
Yeah, I love it. I love the balanced approach to where it's, this isn't a one size fits all. Most
Correct.
executives have multiple things that they need to do every day. And so if you come and say, hey, we got to get you to 100 here tomorrow, I think you're going to lose them right away. So taking that approach.
It's not a reporting relationship. They don't work for us. We are not mandating, like we want to be their partner to help them go as far as they are willing to go to minimize risk, right? Like that's our North Star is like, how do we take risk off the table? But the worst thing in security and privacy is security and privacy that don't get used. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm not going to give you a bunch of things if you're not going to use them. It's better to have an honest conversation and say, hey, what's realistic? What can we achieve together? And how do we get you there as efficiently as possible? We find that like trust, that honesty is like really, really, really important to getting great results.
Yeah, love it. So, all right. So somebody's listening, wants to get started. Like, what do they need to
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, I would say if you're a security leader and you're interested in learning more about our program, learning more about how we work with executive teams, go on our website, book a demo. If you're not ready to commit, we also offer like a free 10 question, we call it a preliminary cyber health score. It takes 2 minutes total. It's a truncated version of what we'll do when we're doing proper sort of intake. But again, it can give you a very, very good flavor. We'll show you sort of like how the mechanics work. It's like we assess, we measure, we resource against that with a care plan, and you'll sort of see how that'll work on a larger scale. For most people, like that 2 minute sort of free preliminary cyber health score will kind of start to connect the dots where they like totally get how it works. And again, we also offer a ton of free resources online if you want to read about how we're thinking about things, risk we're thinking about for executives. So yeah, we call it the Cyber Health Journal, and we have like a ton of content.
Yeah, I love it. I did the free assessment. I did okay. But there was room for improvement there on my side, right? And I think I worked in this space every day, all day long, right? So it's a really good way to start saying, hey, what are the things I could be doing to get better at this? And connecting those dots like we talked about, just open the eyes and have a conversation about this is real. It's something we do need to address, and we can. Right? I mean, that's the other side of it too. Is I think a lot of cyber feels like, what are we going to do? We're just going to get hacked anyway, right? And so this gives you a little bit of a, okay, all right, I can take some simple steps. I can do some things. I can add some protections here without that hopelessness of like, I'm going to get cancer anyway and die, right? So, you know,
I think even back to like my original story, like it is hard to get off zero, right?
yeah,
Not knowing where to start is a huge problem, right? And that results in apathy and people just bury their head in the sand and like, Apple's probably got this covered. I'm good.
yeah,
And I think for us, that's one of the main problems that we solve is like, we want to be like the easy button, if you will, like press button, get CyberHealth. How do we make it as simple as possible for someone who wants to receive this to be able to receive it? And again, I think just go to the website. That's like sort of the first step. Like, congratulations, you've done a great job already. Even if they don't end up heeding every single thing that we like believe is worthwhile for them, something is certainly better than nothing. Relative excellence is the name of the game. It is not about being bulletproof. That's not what we offer.
yeah.
We offer like personalized approach for high risk individuals about how do you minimize the likelihood bad things happen, given that you're not someone who wants to live in a cave with no cell phone and a credit card for the rest of your life. Like, there is
Yeah.
real world consequences to the choices that make, and we want to be an ideal partner that treats them maturely, is not fear sort of baiting them into submission, to get our way. But again, we want to be collaborative with each of our members, each of the executives that we work with, to make sure that they're getting what they want out of it.
I love it. You're using that healthcare language, our members, right? Like,
Yes,
come
sir.
on, I love it. I love it.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it resonates, right? I mean, that's really what we're trying to do. That's what we need to do as individuals, as executives, as practitioners, right? It is a health score, right? It's a practice that needs to get better and better. And the more consistent we are at, going for a run every day or taking a walk or lifting weights or whatever, right? The more we do that in our health, the better off we are. Same thing here, right?
It's, by the way, it's not just marketing language. Like, I really do believe that like
Yeah.
security and online privacy at like the personal level will like closely trace the path of healthcare, like where it was like just
Mm,
reactive, right? You're sick, call the doctor. Then we started to think about some of these public health measures, right? Which I think is like enterprise security, like having secure products and secure
yeah.
communities, et cetera. But like, what did we see in the last 25 years? It's like all about proactive healthcare. It's about measuring your VO2 max or your biological age, right? Like, it's about getting ahead of product, putting down the cigarette, right? Like eating healthy, exercising, like the proactive movement in healthcare. And we're seeing it now to a super extreme with longevity stuff. But like, I do believe that security and privacy will evolve in that way, where people are going to start thinking about this stuff more proactive. And that's largely because our value is accruing online, right? Like, however you define your crown jewels, I promise they are increasingly digital every year. And the thought of like losing the contents of your iCloud or your email or your hard drive, right? Your backups, these are like things that are core assets for individuals today. And I don't think that losing access or losing exclusivity to them is acceptable. It's almost like being injured. And so we do believe that like that healthcare analogy is actually really, really strong and does make a meaningful difference in communicating why this is important and why you should be investing in this ahead of a problem.
Yeah, I love it. And so, I mean, to that end, right? What's coming down the pike? What's next for you guys? What are you looking at from trends and just kind of, next 18 months with all the changes that are happening in cyber? What's on the roadmap for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like we are doing a lot more internally with AI. I'll probably keep some of that quiet for now just because we're not quite ready to talk about it. But suffice it to say, like, we are pro like using it to help people. We think it's a meaningful way that we will be able to scale what we do down at like a much more affordable price range where we can give like very like personal recommendations without sort of the big ticket that we have today. But I will just like, I guess like the sort of the softball answer here is that the problem is getting worse, right?
Yeah.
Even though we do fancy ourselves, like we are capable of handling emergencies for people. We do support and we do have like an emergency like function. our preference is to work with people proactively. And like, I can't stress that enough, is that like, you do not need another story, right? Another Kash
Yeah.
Patel getting his personal email compromised, right? Like, you do not need another one of these to say like, why can't this happen to me, to get off zero. And so I think like starting ahead of a problem, like just get going, is like the thing that we're really focused on. Like, how do we broaden our messaging to like reach more people, to make sure that people are aware that like this stuff is not only a big pain, but very, very preventable if you invest in it ahead of time.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And yeah, I like that response too. I'm like, hey, don't call me. Like, you can call me when the crap hits the fan. That's great, but so much better to get ahead of it,
It's a
right?
very, very different price point, I promise
Yeah.
you. And we don't like doing it because
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. We prefer not to work with people in that way. We would prefer where the time and the pressure are amped down, and we can be sort of very deliberate in our approach. Um, Once you're sort of in the middle of an incident, there's a lot more trade-offs that have to be considered against time. And again, I would prefer that we're talking about this from a quote unquote longevity perspective, not like you showed up in the ER, and if we don't fix this immediately, like the clock is ticking, consequences are happening right now.
Yeah. No, super important. As we come into 2020, end of 2026, into 2027, all sorts of changes happening in the industry, accountability going up for executives in this space, not just at the CISO level, but now across the board, right? Where are you making your investments? What did you do, not do to protect, the data, your users, et cetera? Breaches are happening faster and faster. And so there's just a lot here to think about. So this is definitely a good time to sit down and go, just like, if when COVID hit the world, right? It's a good time to sit down and say, hey, is my personal health at such a spot that I would not be in a high risk category, right?
It were the immunocompromised people who got the worst consequences. The
Yeah.
people who were not prepared, they weren't resilient
Yeah.
physically, were the susceptible ones. And we think it is a great analogy for us. We do think about reducing the likelihood you ever get compromised, but we also think about your capacity to respond. Can I mitigate consequences, right? Like, if someone gets in, how do we sort of silo it and keep the consequences limited? And how quickly can we get you back up and running to regular full health? Those are like equally important to
Yeah.
staying off sort of the, the scoreboard in the first place. So, yes, I like two thumbs up to that analogy. And again, we believe this is like sort of 21st century healthcare, if you will, that people should be thinking about this stuff from, okay, how do we contingency plan? How do we make sure that, I'm not completely pwned if this happens and this happens? And
Yeah.
again, that does require like getting off zero.
Love it. Well, Jeremy, thanks so much for the time, dude. This is great. I love what you
Thank
guys are
you.
doing. I do think this is super important. So anyone tuning in, check out cyberhealth.co. Go check it out. Take the free assessment. Talk to your executive teams. Jeremy's fantastic. You won't regret talking to him, and
Yeah.
just kind of going through, hey, how do we do this in a scalable way, and help protect our organization, protect our executives from being that source of breach, right? Being in the news. Sure, that's a fear thing, but there's a real risk here. And so just starting to think about how do we improve our health from a cyber perspective is really important.
Companies are just a collection of people, and if there's one message I can leave you, it's definitely not too late to get off zero. So reach out to us, as Rocky mentioned, cyberhealth.co, or grab me on LinkedIn or X. Like, I'm super open to having conversations with any companies who are thinking about this.
Love it. Well, Jeremy, thanks again, man. And
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
hopefully we'll chat again soon when you start to thinking more about those AI things and ready to tell the world. So looking forward
Thank
to
you.
it. Take
Appreciate
care,
it.
man.